everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I hope that you can hear us, that you can see us perfectly fine. We're giving people a couple of minutes to join us. In the meantime, I would love to know where you're watching, whether you're in Canada or outside of Canada. I want to welcome you guys and thank you for taking the time to join us today in this free webinar. We're going to be talking about permanent residence in the province of New Brunswick. Now, this could be for anyone, whether you're currently in Canada living in New Brunswick and you're looking for ways to become a PR, or whether you're outside of the province in Canada and looking to see if New Brunswick is ideal for you, or maybe you're outside and you're considering making Canada a new home, where you should move to. Well, you get to know a little bit more about New Brunswick, its immigration programs, and if they are beneficial to you. So we have Indira here and she's in Moncton, so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We have a couple of people here as well, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to give it about 2 minutes or so we'll start right at 12:05. I also want to be respectful of your time and of the fact that you've joined us at 12 o'clock when it's supposed to start. So thank you once again. Where's everyone from? So I see a lot of hellos. Maybe you can share with me what country you're in or where you're from, if you're here, whether you're a student, you're a worker, etc. Gives me an idea on the audience and who we're speaking to. So we'll get started shortly, in about a minute or so. Just waiting for a couple of more people to join us, and then we'll get started. We have somebody else, Fredericton, New Brunswick. Awesome, that's great. So I actually have to visit the province of New Brunswick. I haven't done so, but I would love to. Hello, hi John, how are you? So we have someone from Quebec as a student. We have Adriana Ramirez. She's in Ontario on a work permit. And we have Kay Genius on a student in Ontario. Someone is from Colombia. She's an international student in Moncton. Awesome. I'm also Colombian. That's awesome. Someone's on a PGWP, Vancouver from the Philippines. Welcome, British Columbia. All right, we have Olubuwale, Windsor, Ontario. So we have a lot of people from Ontario. We also have people from New Brunswick. So that's awesome. He's from Jamaica, but he's living in Toronto visiting. All right, Melissa, that's awesome. I was actually in Jamaica a couple of weeks ago. Ocho Rios, my husband's Jamaican, so awesome. You guys have great food. Okay, well, we'll get started now. It's 12:05. So just want to let you know a little bit about what we're going to be discussing. Now, this video will be saved on YouTube. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, that's perfectly fine. For the sake of being fair to everybody and just making sure that I'm able to kind of make the presentation flow, if you want to ask a question, you can do so in the chat. I will be answering them at the end of the presentation, just so we make sure that things flow and I'm not stopping frequently. So because I'm here by myself, I'll be answering all of those questions at the end of the presentation. So just go ahead and type them and I'll review them after. So you're gonna get to know a little bit about us, who we are. I'm going to present myself, present the company, tell you a little bit about what we do, so you get acquainted with our business model, how we work, who we help, etc. We're now then going to dive into New Brunswick and its immigration programs. Now, we're going to be discussing the New Brunswick Express Entry pathway, and there's 2 of them, as well as the New Brunswick Skilled Worker Stream. There's 3 pathways under that one, and then the Atlantic Immigration Program. Now, the Atlantic Immigration Program, if you don't know, for New Brunswick has reached its cap. I think it did so about 2 weeks ago, I think early April. Nonetheless, if you still have some time in your PGWP or you're currently a student, it's a great program to consider in the near future. However, if you're coming to an end on your validity of work permit, then perhaps it's not something that's feasible for you at this time, at least not in the province of New Brunswick, because it has officially closed. So first and foremost, let's introduce Velosa Immigration. So my name is Sandra Velosa. I'm an immigration consultant, registered, and we work out of the province of Ontario, but I've worked with lots of people from New Brunswick. We actually had an education consultant that worked with us and still continues to do so out of New Brunswick. So we've sent a lot of people to NBCC as well as Crandall University. So we're very acquainted with the schools and the province itself, all of the immigration programs. We've done plenty of PRs through the Atlantic Immigration Program, etc. So I feel very comfortable with the information that I'm providing today. I started the business about 5 years ago or so through the pandemic. We have a completely virtual office, meaning that we serve people from all over the world. Now, because I am Colombian and I do speak Spanish, most of our clientele speak Spanish as well. I mean, you feel comfortable speaking your own language. That's not to say that that's the only people that we serve. We've worked with people from Africa, South Africa, and Nigeria, also the Philippines, Australia, Dubai, you named it. We've worked with people from everywhere. I mean, Jamaica, I said my husband's Jamaican, so we also get clients from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, etc. So feel very comfortable speaking both languages, Spanish and English. So that's the languages that we have currently in the office, and we take care of all immigration process with the exception of refugee processes. We don't do any asylum cases, but anything else we have a lot of experience in. With that being said, and I've introduced myself, I also have a colleague. His name is Hernando Belchio. He's not here right now. He's also a registered immigration consultant. He's my right hand. Him and I work with all of our client base, and he speaks Italian as well. So he's Argentinian, but he also speaks Italian. So if it matters to anybody or anybody feel comfortable in that language, then that's also a language that we can provide you service in. So let's dive right into the reason why you're here. Let's get to learn a little bit more about the immigration programs of New Brunswick. Now, before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of context and background so you get to understand what a provincial nominee program is, as well as understand the differences. A lot of people kind of don't really get that still. So if you do, great, but if you don't, I'll give you a little bit of information. So each province has its own provincial nominee programs. With that being said, they get to manage who they invite. They also get to manage, to a certain degree, the types of programs and how they develop these programs. These programs are really developed to stimulate the economy of the province. So you're going to find a lot of differences in the provinces. I mean, BC will have a certain focus, whether it's tech or early childhood education. Ontario, same thing. Ontario also focuses in health. And we'll see that New Brunswick maybe has a different focus, maybe social services, tech as well, etc. So we'll see also flexibility. Maybe there'll be more requirements in certain provinces than others. I find that the Atlantic, specifically New Brunswick, is very flexible in terms of like the language requirements and the employment requires, as opposed to, for example, Ontario. If you're appointed to Ontario, you'll find that the employer has to show a lot more than perhaps an employer in New Brunswick. So that's why we see a lot of differences, and that's really what you want to focus on, the flexibility of the programs, the requirements, not only for you as the applicant, but also for the employer that's going to be supporting your application. So you'll find two streams, basically. We'll find the streams that are tied to the express entry, which require the applicant to have an express entry profile, as well as make an expression of interest directly to the province in order then to apply for PR. And you'll find provincial nominee programs that are not tied to express entry, which will require an expression of interest. But once you receive an invitation, you'll apply for your PR. So it's a two-step process. That's one requires express entry, one doesn't. So if it does require express entry, because you have to have an express entry profile, you also have to understand the requirements for express entry and be eligible, whether it be for the Canadian Experience class or the Federal Skilled Worker stream or the Federal Skilled Trade stream. It's very important that you understand that. We're not going to be discussing that because that will be a whole new topic, but you have to understand exactly what it means to be eligible for express entry if you're going to be applying through one of those streams. Now, with that being said, today we're going to focus on 3 immigration programs in New Brunswick, which is the New Brunswick Express Entry stream, the New Brunswick Skilled Worker stream, and the Atlantic Immigration Program. So the New Brunswick Express Entry stream requires you to have an express entry profile, as I mentioned before, but you also need to meet one of the 2 criteria depending on what stream you want to apply. So there's 2 streams right now under the express entry stream. There's the employment in New Brunswick, and then there's New Brunswick interest. The employment in New Brunswick will require you to not only be eligible for one of the streams in express entry, but you'll need to have a full-time non-seasonal job or job offer from an employer in New Brunswick. and you must have lived and worked in the province for at least 12 months, and these have to be consecutive months, right? So you'll find that most provincial nominee programs will require you to have a job offer or be currently working in the province. And that's something that's very important. So if you're outside of the country, you have to understand that you have to have a job offer or already be working in the province. Now, if we're looking at the New Brunswick interest, you have to have received a letter of interest directly in your federal entry profile. Now, this one's a little tricky because the province will only allow you to apply if you receive a letter of interest. And they mentioned that you're more likely to get a letter of interest if you meet one of the following criteria, and I'm going to be reading this. So if you or your spouse have a close family member who is Canadian citizen or permanent resident that has been residing in the province of New Brunswick for at least 12 months, you're more likely to get a letter of interest. Because what that means is that because you have a family member that's already been living there, that's a PR Canadian citizen, well, you're more likely to stay in the province, and that's really what the province is looking for. You're also more likely to get a letter of interest under the New Brunswick interest stream if you've attended an information session, so it's an international recruitment event led by the government of New Brunswick within the last 12 months. A cool thing about New Brunswick is if you go on their website, you're able to see that they do international recruitment events as well as national recruitment events where they'll be looking for specific people, whether it be in healthcare or tech or social services, etc. And they also focus on different demographics. So they'll have certain recruitment events out in Africa, out in Asia, out in Latin America, etc. So you want to make sure that you're constantly visiting that website if you're looking for a job in Canada. But you're more likely to get that letter of interest if you've attended one of these in the last 12 months. And last but not least, if you're a francophone and your primary occupation is an sector in demand in New Brunswick, then you're more likely to also get a letter of interest. Now, what are the sectors in demand in New Brunswick? Well, we're looking at healthcare. We're looking at IT, so anything in tech, really. Careers and education. So early education is something that really has been very popular lately. I mean, we've also seen it added to the Express Entry. Careers in forestry, careers in construction as well, so trades and food production. So anybody that's been working in one of these sectors, which is considered in demand, has a likelihood of receiving a letter of interest. There's no way really to apply other than having an Express Entry profile, meeting one of those eligibility criteria, and then indicating that you want to reside in New Brunswick and wait to receive that letter of interest. And when you receive that letter of interest, you can then apply for your PR. Now, let's dive into the eligibility criteria for the New Brunswick employment in New Brunswick. So as mentioned before, and it seems very repetitive, but once again, you have to have a valid profile in the Federal Express Entry pool. You must have lived and worked full-time for 12 consecutive months in an occupation. Now, because this stream is tied to Express Entry, your occupation has to be a skilled position. So it has to be tier 0, 1, 2, or 3 for an employer in the province. So very important that not all occupations are going to apply. It must be a skilled position. You must hold at least a Canadian high school diploma or its equivalency if you've graduated outside of the country. And if so, then you need an education credential assessment. You need to intend and be able to live and work permanently in the province. And that's very important. I get very often like, when can I move, or, do I have to stay there? During the duration of the process, and ideally for some programs afterwards, you have to reside in the province. So it's very important that you understand that you have a commitment with the province when you're doing your PR through a provincial nominee program to stay in the province at least for a period of time until you get your PR, and sometimes after. Then you need to meet federal approval funds. If you're exempt, for example, if you have a job offer, then you're exempt. But if you're not, then you have to have certain funds depending on the size of your family, be between the ages of 19 and 55, and have a minimum score in your selection grade of 67 out of 100. Now, the process is very simple. You're going to have to create a profile in the Federal Express Entry pool, and then you're going to have to go and do an expression of interest in the IMB portal, which is a portal directly managed by the province of New Brunswick. Now, if you were to get a letter of interest under the New Brunswick interest stream, then you need to as well have a valid Express Entry profile, have received that letter of interest, have at least 1 year of paid continuous work in the last 10 years. Again, because it's tied to Express Entry, it needs to be a skilled position. So we're looking at tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. You need to have a minimum of a CLB 7 in all 4 languages, bands, whether it be English or French. Have at least a high school diploma or its equivalency. Have the intention to reside in New Brunswick. Meet the proof of funds if required. Be from the ages of 19 and 55, and in the grid of selection, have at least 67 out of 100. Okay? So this again shows you the process. First, the Federal Express Entry profile. Once you have that job seeker code and everything else, and you get that letter of interest, then you would go directly to the IMB portal, create your account, submit your expression of interest, and then you would go from there. So those are the only ones that are tied to Express Entry. Now, if we wanted to apply directly to the province through an expression of interest without the need of having an Express Entry profile, well, there's also pathways that allow you to do so to become permanent residents. So these are for people that are working or have a job offer in the province and want to settle and meet the eligibility criteria. Now there's 3 pathways. So there have been some changes announced to these pathways early on in the year, and we're going to be talking about those. But right now there's 3 pathways under the New Brunswick skilled worker stream. So we have the New Brunswick experience pathway, we have the New Brunswick graduates pathway, and we have the New Brunswick priority occupations pathway. Now, each of these programs have their own individual criteria, but they also coincide in some things. So there are general eligibility criteria that we want to take a look at that apply for all programs. That means that you have to have lived and worked full-time in a non-seasonal position for at least 6 months for an employer in New Brunswick. And I'm going to show you shortly what your employer has to do in order to meet the employer criteria, because this is an added step that was in there last year and it is now. You have to have an educational level that meets the requirements for the job according to the occupational classification. What does that mean? So if we go online and we go through the job bank, some positions will require a minimum of high school diploma, other positions will require a college diploma, etc. So depending on the job offer, the job that you're currently working in, your education has to meet that requirement. So if the position that you currently have or the job offer that you're being offered requires you to have a college diploma, then at minimum, that's what you have to have, whether your studies were completed in Canada or outside of Canada. Now we're looking at the level of language skills, and look at it's a CLB 4. So you have to at least have a CLB 4 in all bands, whether it's English or French. I mean, if we're considering Express Entry or we're considering provincial nominee programs in other provinces where you actually get scored in your level of English or French, a CLB 4 is very, very low. So it's important to start looking at the flexibility of this program as opposed to maybe programs in other provinces, as well as programs maybe tied to Express Entry, because the level of English is fairly lower. For example, we saw before they need a CLB 7, now we're looking at a CLB 4. You need to have the intention and ability to settle work permanently in Canada and be at least 19 years of age. Now, the province has also made it very clear that there are people that will not be receiving an invitation, and this applies not only to the New Brunswick skilled worker stream, but also through the Express Entry and the Atlantic program. For most of them have the same knocks. Nonetheless, I would still verify. But these are the knocks or occupations that the province says they're not going to be processing. So for example, if you had a job offer or were currently working in the province of New Brunswick as a cook, right here, NOG 63200, your application would not be processed. Doesn't matter if you meet all the eligibility criteria, your occupation right now will not be offered. Why? For the simple fact that they've received an abundance of applications for these occupations, and the province sees no longer a need for these occupations, so they want to give people other opportunities in sectors that perhaps are more in demand to be able to become PRs. So before you even get started, or you accept a job offer, or you even go to school for something, you want to make sure that you look at this list to not waste your time. So I had a consultation with someone who was in the process of applying for her PGWP, and she was being offered a position as an administrative assistant. So I said, can you perhaps get a job offer as an assistant, but not necessarily administrative assistant? I don't recall now, but I think receptionist or another similar title has a different knock. So she wanted to talk to her employer to see if that was an option. So don't focus so much on the title, focus on the knock and the job duties. So that's important. You want to make sure, because sometimes you have different job titles, but they have the same knock, right? So receptionists and administrative assistants may have the same knock. I can't recall right now, but that's something that you want to be very wary of before you even accept a job offer or want to go ahead and get started in your process. Now, if we wanted to do it through the New Brunswick skilled worker stream without express entry, then the process doesn't require you to have an express entry profile, but you still need to have an expression of interest. So once you have a job offer, you're going to submit an expression of interest through the New Brunswick portal, and then you're going to have to wait for an invitation. And now this is important because a lot of times people think that when they do an expression of interest that they've submitted an application. An expression of interest is very different from an application. An expression of interest is simply that you're expressing your interest to the province that you want to be considered for a PR, and they have to support that application. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have already been invited, nor does it mean that you have an application. What does this mean? That if your status is about to expire, you need to find a way to remain in status. An expression of interest does not give you status in Canada. Very, very important. Once you receive an application, then you're going to allow some time for assessment from the province. So perhaps they're going to be asking for the job offer now, everything to do with your employer, if you're a student, credentials, references, pay stubs, etc. So everything to prove that what you've claimed in your expression of interest is in fact true. You're going to be submitting that to the province, and you're going to allow some time for assessment. You're then going to receive a decision from Immigration New Brunswick. If approved and everything's correct and there's no changes that need to be made or anything, then you're going to receive that nomination, and then we have to now apply to the federal government and wait for a decision from the federal government. Remember that the federal government always has the last say, so you need to be admissible to the country in order for you to successfully obtain your PR, right? So very important that you understand it's a two-way process, and we must wait to get that final approval from the federal government. Now let's focus on the first stream under the New Brunswick skilled worker stream. So the first one is for the New Brunswick Experience Pathway. So this is for anybody that has a full-time and non-seasonal employment working for a designated or regulated occupation. So what it simply means, and I'm going to show you what it means to be designated now, because like I mentioned before, this is a change. But your employer simply has to give you a job offer, and they have to do something in order to designate themselves. It's not quite as extensive as the Atlantic Immigration Program, but they still have to go ahead and do an application online. You need to meet that minimum education level as per your NOC, as mentioned before. So depending on the job offer or your experience, you must have the required education for that specific code. A minimum language level of 4, whether it be English or French. And you must have lived in New Brunswick with a valid temporary resident status for at least 6 months before submitting the application. And this is important as well. I've had clients that meet all the eligibility criteria, but they've only been in the province for 4 months because they moved from Ontario or they moved from BC, right? And there's 4 months in. Well, kind of have to wait for get the 6 months before we get started. Now, if you're a graduate, that you've graduated from a New Brunswick school, whether it be NBCC or CRAND or anything of that nature. Oh, well, this doesn't apply for CRAND, sorry. So it's NBCC, then this would be for you. So you need to have successfully completed an eligible PGWP study program at a DLI in New Brunswick. Sorry, yes, it does. I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself. So it can be for a private school. So as long as your school is an eligible DLI and it provides you with a PGWP, then you're fine. You need to work full-time or have a full-time job offer in a non-seasonal position with an employer. Now, keep in mind that they don't require you to be working a minimum amount of hours with the employer. You simply have to be working full-time or have a full-time job offer. So even if you have a full-time job offer but are not currently working there and the employer, you're still eligible to apply. You need to meet the educational level required for the position, and you have to have resided with temporary status for at least 6 months and have the intention and ability to settle permanently in New Brunswick, be at least 19 years of age, and demonstrate a CLB-4. Now, we all know now that when you're applying for your PGWP, you have to take an English or French test that has to be passed. And depending whether it's college or university, you have to meet a certain CLB. Most students should pass the CLB-4, so this is fine. As long as you have a job offer and your employer designates themselves and meets all of these criteria, you should be good to go. Now, you're exempted from a language result as long as your employment in New Brunswick is in a skilled position, so 0, 1, 2, or 3, or your study program at a DLI in New Brunswick was in English or French. So most people are maybe not required to submit a language exam, but if you have it, I say go ahead and submit it anyways. Why not? Now, the last one is very particular. Again, it's kind of similar to the Express Entry interest in the sense that it only applies for certain people. And so to be eligible, you have to have accepted a full-time non-seasonal job offer from an employer in New Brunswick, have at least 1 year of paid work experience related to the job. So if you were getting a job offer as a cook, then your experience for at least a year has to have been as a cook. You need to have, again, the minimum educational requirement for that NOC, a CLB-4, whether it be in English or French, have the intention to live and reside in the province, be at least 19 years of age. But then what's important here is that right now they're looking at what's called priority NOCs and government-led recruitment. So the job offer itself must have been offered as a direct result of a recruitment mission organized by the government of New Brunswick under the following NOCs. And so they've done it in sectors. So health, occupations, education, and I think they have construction trades as well. So this also gives you some insight on the focus of the province, what they're really prioritizing in terms of what's in demand in the province. But specifically, you have to have gotten a job offer through one of these recruitment events to be eligible to apply for the New Brunswick Priority Occupations Pathway. Okay, so that's important. People are asking me, well, how can I attend one of these recruitment events? Again, this is through the New Brunswick website, their official website. They typically have it either by sectors, so whether it be health, education, IT, construction, or sometimes even by region. So they'll do recruitments out in Asia, areas in Africa, Latin America, Europe, etc. Just have to be attentive to that. Now, I mentioned that your employer has to be designated for the New Brunswick skills stream, whether it be for students or for workers, or the one that I just mentioned. This wasn't here before, but it's a requirement now. There is a link that they're going to have to follow, and it's actually in all of the guides. So when you click that link, they're actually going to have to go and register themselves to hire foreign workers. So they need to have certain requirements as well, but one of them is to actually do this register Now, we've worked with certain clients and employers can do this in a day. So it's not tedious by any means. It's something that's fairly simple to do. It's just important that it's done before your application. So the employer has to have a physical office, a business address, and a telephone in New Brunswick. They need to be actively operating in the province for at least 24 months, comply with provincial and federal laws, provide you with an employer support. So there is a form that they have to complete, not as extensive as the one in Ontario. Again, if you've seen the one in Ontario, I mean, the things that they ask is quite extensive, not here. So it's just a simple form. They need to offer you the full-time non-seasonal employment, and they need to pay the federal fee of $230. And this is for if your work permit is coming to an end. Now, PR applications are taking so long now, and when it's through a provincial nominee program, it could be a year or maybe even more, right? With that being said, people sometimes get wary, what's going to happen? You know, my PGWP is going to expire. What's going to happen? So most of the times employers will pay this fee, and what it does is while you're in the process of waiting a decision, you get to apply for a closed work permit to continue working with that employer while a decision is rendered in your application. So if the fee is not paid, there's no option for the work permit. So it's basically an LMI exempt fee that the employer needs to make, allowing you to apply for a closed work permit so you can continue to work. And now let's talk about the Atlantic Immigration Program. Again, I'll mention it again, but if you missed it in the first half, the program is closed right now for New Brunswick. It doesn't mean that it's closed for the other Atlantic provinces, which are PEI, Newfoundland, Labrador, or Nova Scotia, but it is closed for New Brunswick. So if you're thinking of applying, they've met their quota, you would be looking at next year. So one of the most important things is you need to have a job offer from a designated employer. Now there's a list that's public that you can go look at it online. You simply Google designated employers in New Brunswick, you'll get that list. The job offer has to be from one of these employers in order for you to apply through the Atlantic program. It must be for jobs in tier anywhere from 0 to 4, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be skilled per se. They don't want to accept job offers in tier 5, but it could be anywhere from 0 to 4. Now, depending on the stream, if you're a student or not, and there's exceptions, but you need to have certain work experience in your job offer. So let's say your job offer is in a tier 0, then they're going to accept related relevant experience in any other tiers, anywhere from 0 to 4. If your job offer is in tier 1, then they're going to accept any related relevant experience in tier 1, 2, 3, or 4, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the experience has to be within the last 5 years, and it could be in Canada and outside of Canada. The cool thing about this program is they also accept work experience that you gained while you studied as long as you're paid. So I've had clients where they've only studied a 1-year program, gotten their PGWP, but because they did their co-op with the employer that's now offering the full-time position, we get to use some of the hours for their co-op to make up the 1,560 hours that equates to 1-year work experience that's required. So we're actually able to apply way sooner, allowing them to stay in Canada, continue working, etc. So this is a program that I love. I find it extremely flexible and very beneficial. Now, if you're an international student that graduated from a program of at least 2 years at an Atlantic institution, whether it be New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, etc., and you were a full-time student in the region for at least 16 months in the 2 years before graduating, and you have a valid work permit, then you're exempt from demonstrating work experience, right? So let's say you graduated from NBCC and you graduated from a program that's 2 years. You only need the job offer from the employer. You don't need to show 1-year work experience in the last 5 years. That's very important, right? Now, there is a list of institutions that apply. So Crandall, for example, isn't in the list of institutions that apply. Therefore, if you've graduated from Crandall, you still need to show the year work experience with related to the job offer that you're getting. Okay, so it's very important that you check out that list to see if your school will allow you to show no work experience or if you still have to show work experience. Sorry. Now, depending on the job offer of the tier, that's the education level that you'll need. So for positions in tier 0 or 1, you're going to need minimum 1 year in a post-secondary level. And this can be outside of Canada or inside of Canada. And if your job offer is in tier 2, 3, or 4, then at minimum you need a high school diploma. The language level required, again, is really based on the tier of the position. So for tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, you need a CLB 5, and for a tier 4, you need a CLB 4. Now, you need to demonstrate that you have enough settlement funds, depending on the size of your family. But if you have a job offer in Canada, then you don't need to demonstrate that. Either way, when we submit these applications, we always tell our clients to submit it with funds. We need to show something in your bank account. It's important. So just keep that in mind. Now, the process is very simple. You obtain a job offer. You have to also get a settlement plan. There's a list of providers that provide this service completely free. They don't help you with job searching. They only provide a settlement plan once you are directly working with an employer that's looking to help you and is a designated employer. And you must receive an endorsement certificate and apply for PR. With that being said, again, the province isn't accepting applications for certain NOC codes. Here's a list of them. And if you've submitted your application and it was received before February 18th of this year, then they'll still process it. I find that some clients have told me, hey, I submitted it, but I still haven't received a response. So, I mean, cross your fingers that you do, because they're probably prioritizing occupations that are more in demand. But as mentioned, the program is closed. We just have to wait and see what happens. Now, here's our information. If you wanted to get in touch with us, if you wanted to contact us, below it's our WhatsApp number. You can send us a WhatsApp if you feel comfortable, as well as give us a call. You could also send us an email at info@velosaimmigration.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, social media. For the Velosa Immigration is the Spanish channel. If you put Velosa Immigration CA, all of the content is in English. And you can follow us there. We typically just give people updates on what's happening, our videos, etc., so on. I'm going to go now and answer some of the questions that you guys have here, just to be fair. So let's see. So Pascal says he's from Nigeria, staying at BC. He's doing a 1-year course on a community support and addiction counseling. Okay, so this is not really a question. But thank you for being here, Pascal. Can I apply for different PMPs living in New Brunswick, and does it have to be with the same NOC code? So you can have different expression of interest, but you can't apply. So if you get an invitation from one, you would have to withdraw your application from the other one, right? So it's very important. You can have 2 active applications. So as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, it's fine. But just you can't have 2 active applications. So you have to decide at the end which one you're going to go with. Now it says does it have to be the same NOC code? Well, I mean, it would only make sense, right? Because most of these applications require you to have experience within a certain time frame or have a job offer. So I need to understand if you're working 2 jobs or if you have 2 job offers and you're trying to decide which one you're going to go with. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same NOC code per se, but it does have to make sense, right? Let's see this one. I'm referring to New Brunswick Express Entry employment in New Brunswick. Based on the latest limitations, you're more likely to receive an ITA for a tier 2 night in construction or a tier 0 night in management. Sorry, is this a statement or a question? So it's hard to say because New Brunswick doesn't really do a good job in making public all of it's hard to find the information for the draws that they have. What I often find is that we mentioned the positions that are in demand or what the province considers in demand. I would argue that there's more of a need for positions that are in tier 2 or 3 than so much management per se, especially when it comes down to the trades and in construction. So most trades are in tier 3, even 2. So if you were to decide which one, it would be more than likely a tier 2 position. But I mean, it really depends on the job offer. I would have to take a look at it and see and compare. But it's more than likely on a position that it's tier 2, I would argue. My brother's a self-employed in construction industry. Are there any pathways in New Brunswick for a construction person who is self-employed outside of Canada? If your brother had a company where he could hire you and he met all the requirements, then we can find a pathway, right? So I have had clients who, now again, it has to be a genuine offer, because when you have a family member that's offering you a position, then immigration has to be wary of that, because they see that they really focus on whether this job offer is genuine or whether this job offer is just being given to you because you're a family member and not necessarily because you're going to come work here, right? So are there opportunities for people that are self-employed outside of Canada to come to Canada? Looking outside of New Brunswick, we can start looking at the startup visa, for example. Until recently, a lot of people use the LMIA process sometimes to buy businesses in Canada and then kind of hire themselves through the process and gain points that way. The points have now been taken away, so that's a little different. And I mean, it would be completely different information than what we're discussing right now. So there are ways for people or entrepreneurs that want to invest in the country and want to reside here. As it pertains to the presentation today and your question, unless your brother has a company that they can hire you from, then no. I'm currently in Halifax, Nova Scotia with a conditional RN license, looking at relocating to New Brunswick. What are my chances if I do not have an offer yet? It's hard, right? Because some of the questions sometimes I need more context. But as we saw, you really need to have a job offer in order for you to be eligible for any of these programs, or at least have worked in the province, right? So you need to have worked in the province, which you haven't because you've been working in Nova Scotia, or have a job offer. So if you're an RN, my first bet would be to start really looking for a job before you even make that decision to move elsewhere. Because other than that, I just don't see an option for you, right? So, I mean, I would say, hey, if you already have experience in Nova Scotia and a New Brunswick employer wanted to hire you, the Atlantic program would be great. But now we know that that one's closed. Not sure why you're moving and why you haven't considered perhaps applying through the Atlantic program in Nova Scotia or looked at Nova Scotia's PNPs. But if you're looking at relocating to New Brunswick, then at minimum, you need to have a job offer. Yes, so arranged employment simply means that you have a job offer that's a genuine job offer, that it's legitimate, that you're actually going to be coming to Canada to work. Or if you're already in Canada, that this job offer means that you're going to be working for that employer in that occupation, receiving that salary, doing those job duties. So that's what arranged employment means. I know the terminology can be confusing, and I think that people use this very loosely, but it's essentially just having a job offer. Hi, currently here in BC, I was employed in daycare, so it needs a job offer from me at New Brunswick. Yes, so when you look at all the PNPs, most PNPs will require you to have lived in the province or have a job offer from the province, depending on which one we're applying to. So again, if you've worked in a daycare and with all the changes in BC and realizing that there hasn't been any draw since January, then it would be a good way or a good start for you to start looking at employers as an ECE or anything to do with daycare. Sorry, I'm not sure if you're an ECE, but I mean, whatever position you have in the daycare, start looking for those type of jobs in New Brunswick, so you can find a job offer, right? But it's all tied to job experience or job offer, job experience or job offer, or at minimum have studied in the province. But since you're in BC and you probably didn't study there, then we would need that. Is there any way extension work permits living in New Brunswick and working full-time food sector has express entry profile? Unfortunately, was not available to qualify any programs. So if I'm understanding this correctly, you are asking me if there's any way to extend your work permit. So the only way to extend your work permit is to have legal basis to do so, right? So there needs to be a job offer in place for you to extend your work permit. So let's say you're in the process of a PR application, and as I mentioned prior to your work permit is coming to an end, the employer has paid that government fee, and you now apply for a closed work permit. You're from a country that has a free trade agreement with Canada, and the occupation that they're offering you allows you to apply for a closed work permit as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, and so does the employer. There's a LMIA in place, but there has to be a job offer in place for you to extend your work permit, right? If it's a PGWP, we know that we cannot extend it unless that it wasn't given for its full validity. If you're the spouse of a student or a worker, and depending on what type of position they have, you may or may not be eligible to extend your work permit. I think for some of these questions, it may be beneficial for you guys to book a consultation with us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We actually have two types of consultations. We have an hour consultation, 60 minutes long. It's $230 Canadian. You'll sit down with us. We'll discuss everything more in detail, and we'll try to have a strategy for you in terms of what can be done, maybe looking at other places. Maybe New Brunswick isn't the one for you, but maybe we can look at, for example, the rural immigration program or any other programs that may fit, whether you speak French, maybe looking at the French mobility program to see if that's an option for you, etc. Right? So that's something you want to look at. Now, if you want just to have a very brief conversation with us because you have a question, you've started your process, or perhaps you just are doing your own application and you don't get something, then we have 30-minute calls for $150 Canadian. These are all virtual through Zoom. We have very flexible hours, and the idea is really to help you guys in terms of your needs, but sometimes it's very difficult to answer these questions in a live session because we need to do follow-up questions. It's just not possible to do so. How long does it take for applications to PR to be approved regarding to AP? So I'll be honest with you, I have applications that are now almost a year for the Atlantic Immigration Program because, again, it's a two-step process, right? So once you have that endorsement, you have to apply for the federal government. Mind you, things are taking a little longer than they used to at one point in immigration. So we're looking at PGWPs now have a turnaround time of 8 months. Work permits have now a turnaround time of 203 days. So it's not something that's uncommon at this time. It's frustrating, yes. People are antsy, yes, but be prepared to at least, at minimum, be waiting for a year, maybe a little longer, right? That's really how long it's taking. Can we have a list of New Brunswick employers in the IT sector? So if you go online and you put Google New Brunswick designated employers, you would have to do your own search in terms, because it's a long list. It has anything from Tim Hortons to insurance companies to daycares. Like, it just has everything. So you would want to go ahead and kind of do your own search and then see what you can find, but you can go ahead and do it there. So I'm leaving our website now. So it's Velosa Immigration. If you have any questions, it's info@velosaimmigration.com, and we would be more than glad to assist you. Once again, my name is Sandra Velosa. I'm a registered immigration consultant. It's been a pleasure to be here with you guys. I want to thank you guys for your time, for being here, and just for being so patient with us. I would love to speak to most of you. So if you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, you most certainly can. Once again, thank you very much, and you guys have a good day. I'm trying to put our email on the chat to see, but for some reason it's not loading. But it's info@velocaimmigration.com. I hope that you guys follow us on Instagram and YouTube. We're adding a lot of content. So great to have you guys here. You guys have a good day. Bye now.